Hi, my name is Marjorie Hayes, and to my family, I was never really a daughter. I was the family's solution. Whenever someone made a mistake, I was the one expected to clean it up. When my sister's husband gambled away thousands of dollars, they turned to me, smiling, pretending it was no big deal. They thought my life, my savings, my peace were all theirs to use. But what they didn't know is that I had already moved everything out of their reach. So let me ask you, what do you do when the people who raised you are the very ones who try to ruin you? It was a Thursday morning in Hartford, Connecticut, late March, when the air still bit with winter, but daffodils insisted on pushing through the cold soil anyway. I was in my small apartment finishing up client reports for my accounting firm. The coffee pot burbled in the kitchen, and the steady click of my keyboard filled the room. Everything felt orderly, calm. Then my phone buzzed. It was my mother. Her voice, sweet as honey, spilled through the speaker. "Hi, sweetheart. If you're free today, maybe stop by. Bring that folder, the one with your trust papers. No rush, of course. Just whenever you can." She had never once in my life called me sweetheart unless she wanted something. And I knew exactly what she meant. The folder that held the details of my savings and living trust. Mine, not hers. I stood there for a long moment, staring out my window at the half-frozen garden below. My hands tightened around the phone. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Pretend I didn't hear. Pretend I didn't know. But in my family, boundaries were treated like polite suggestions, easy to bend, easy to erase. By 10 o'clock, I was pulling into the driveway of the Hayes family home, the same brick colonial I had grown up in. It hadn't changed much in 30 years. Same white shutters, same porch swing, same maple tree out front that I used to climb as a child. But to me, it no longer felt like home. It felt like a stage where the same old play was performed over and over again. I walked up the steps slowly, the folder tucked deep inside my bag like a secret I wasn't ready to share. Before I could knock, the front door opened. "There she is," my mother beamed, pulling me into a hug with exaggerated warmth. Behind her, I could smell brunch scrambled eggs, cinnamon rolls, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. I hadn't been invited, but of course that didn't matter. In this house, my presence was always assumed. Inside, my sister Clara sat at the dining table, sipping a mimosa as if she were starring in her own Sunday magazine ad. Across from her, her husband Dennis leaned back in his chair, broad-shouldered, grinning like the world owed him comfort. "Morning, Marge," he said casually, like we were old pals. Only one other person had ever called me Marge, my ex-husband, and it landed like a slap. I pulled out a chair and sat down, trying to steady my breathing. The small talk flowed around me like background noise, Clara talking about redecorating her sunroom, Mom fussing about the neighbors, Dad grunting his approval between bites. And then Dennis cleared his throat. He set down his fork and leaned forward, his smile practiced. "So," he said casually, "think you could float us 60? I blinked. 60? 60,000, he clarified, as if that made it better. Just short term, business stuff. Clara reached over and touched his hand, her voice soft but rehearsed. "You know Dennis never asks for help. This is important." My mother chimed in, eyes locked on me. "It's a small ask, Marjorie, and you've always been the reliable one. That's what we love about you." The words hung in the air, syrupy and sharp all at once. Reliable, dependable, the one who never says no. But what they really meant was, you're the one we can use without guilt. You're the one who won't fight back. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. The bitterness coated my tongue, and for once I let the silence stretch. They all stared at me, waiting for the old Marjorie, the one who nodded, smiled, and quietly gave in. Instead, I stood. "I have a deadline at work," I said. "I'll call you later." I left before they could argue, my bag pressed tightly against my side, the folder inside untouched. Back at my apartment, I set the folder down on the counter. The papers represented years of careful saving, small sacrifices, long nights balancing other people's numbers while secretly building my own safety net. It wasn't huge, but it was mine, entirely mine. I stared at it for a long time, remembering the last time I had dared to say no. Clara had wanted me to co-sign on her second boutique shop, promising it would be the next big thing. I refused. My mother didn't speak to me for 3 months. She told relatives I was going through something. I wasn't. I had just finally decided to stop playing the fool. Still, I knew how this game worked. I'd been the fallback plan since I was a child, the one who cleaned up, who stayed quiet, who made everyone else look stable. And I realized in that moment that nothing had changed. But this time, I was ready. The trust was already protected, locked away behind encryption, secured in ways none of them could reach. And if they tried, they'd find out just how much I had prepared. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and whispered to myself, "Too late." I didn't sleep much that night. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional sound of a car passing on the street outside, everything felt louder, heavier. I sat at my kitchen table with the folder still beside me, unopened. I kept asking myself the same question. When did it start? When did I stop being their daughter and start being their lifeline? The memory came back uninvited, sharp as glass. I was 17, standing in that same family kitchen, clutching an envelope stuffed with cash I had saved for 2 years. Back then, I worked weekends at Murphy's Grocery, just a few blocks from school. It was hard work hauling boxes, bagging groceries, cleaning aisles after closing. My friends teased me for smelling like onions and bleach, but I didn't care. Every dollar I earned went into that envelope. I had a plan: college. Not just any college, but the University of Massachusetts with its architecture program I'd dreamed about since freshman year. I wanted to design spaces that felt like home, places that held people instead of breaking them apart. By the summer before senior year, I had saved nearly $15,000. My guidance counselor had been amazed. "You're more prepared than most parents," she told me. I felt proud, safe. That money was my ticket out. One evening in late August, I came home from a shift, still in my green apron, the envelope tucked under my jacket. Mom was at the kitchen table flipping through bills. Dad sat across from her, his reading glasses perched low, his face pinched. "What's wrong?" I asked. They shared a look, the kind of look parents give each other when they've already decided something. "Sweetheart," Mom said gently, "we've hit a rough patch. The furnace is acting up and your father's hours got cut. We need to borrow that money you've been saving, just for a little while. We'll put it right back." I froze. "But that's my college fund." Dad sighed. "We're not saying you won't go. We're just saying family comes first. You'll understand one day." I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream. But I was 17, standing in their kitchen, and they were the people who clothed me, fed me, sheltered me. Saying no felt impossible. So I handed over the envelope. By September, the furnace was still working fine, and Mom had a new set of pearls. When I asked about the money, Dad snapped, "We told you there were medical costs. Don't question us." No one was sick. No one had gone to the hospital. My college fund had simply vanished into their pockets. I never saw that money again. Back in my apartment years later, the memory made my stomach tighten. I poured another cup of coffee just to keep my hands busy. That betrayal had shaped me. It was the reason I majored in finance instead of architecture, not because I loved numbers, but because I never wanted to be lied to about money again and not know it. It was also the reason I had learned to live small. While Clara bought designer handbags and Dennis played at being an entrepreneur, I worked quietly, built savings, invested carefully. I wasn't flashy, but I was steady, reliable, and apparently that reliability had made me their target. The phone buzzed on my counter, breaking my thoughts. A voicemail. I pressed play. "Hi, sweetheart," Mom's voice chirped. "Just checking in. You've always been so organized. Claire and Dennis could really use your precision right now. No rush, but sooner is better. Love you." I replayed the message. This time listening for what was really there. Not help, not care, not even respect. Just use. I heard it in every word. You're not our daughter. You're a tool, a resource, a calculator in human form. I hit pause and set the phone down. My hands shook. Another memory rose up, one I had buried deep. I was 23, fresh out of college, working my first real job at a small accounting firm in Hartford. Clara had come to see me, her eyes wide, her voice soft. "Dennis has this amazing opportunity," she said. "He just needs a small loan to get started. Nothing crazy, just $10,000. You'll get it back in 6 months." Promise I said no. I was barely making enough to pay rent. She went home and told our parents I was selfish. For months, I was the villain of family dinners. My mother wouldn't even look at me. My father sighed whenever I walked into a room, and then, when Dennis's business collapsed, who do you think they blamed? Not him. Me. For not stepping in to help. That was when I learned the truth. In my family, generosity was never enough. They only remembered the times you refused. I closed my eyes at the kitchen table, trying to steady my breathing. The memories stacked one on top of another. The lost college fund, the boutique I wouldn't co-sign, the endless guilt trips. It wasn't one betrayal. It was a pattern. And now, with $60,000 on the line, it was happening all over again. I opened my laptop, pulling up the encrypted files that held every record of my trust. The savings, the investments, the documents carefully built, carefully protected. I had learned my lessons well. As the screen glowed in the darkened kitchen, I whispered the truth out loud just to hear it. They never saw me as family. They saw me as collateral. The words hurt, but they were real. And for the first time, I realized something else. I wasn't powerless anymore. That night, I took out an old manila folder from the bottom drawer of my desk. Across the front, faded ink spelled out College Fund, 2005. Inside were copies of bank slips, withdrawal notes, even a handwritten promise from my father. "We'll return this by October." It had never happened. I stared at that paper until my eyes blurred. Then I placed it on top of my trust folder, the past stacked neatly against the present. This time, I thought, they won't get away with it. Not again. Saturday morning came gray and restless. Rain tapped against my window, steady and insistent, like a reminder that storms always come back around. I sat at my desk with a mug of cold coffee, staring at the stack of papers from the night before, my old college fund slips, my trust documents, the reminders of every time they had treated me like a bank. I should have felt tired, but instead I felt alert, wired. Something deep inside me whispered that it was time to stop pretending, time to see the truth for what it was. I powered up my laptop, logged into my work email, and started cleaning up overdue messages. Halfway through, I noticed one email that shouldn't have been there. It was a quarterly financial report from Westfield Holdings, the company Dennis claimed he was consulting for. The file had been forwarded accidentally by his assistant. My name was copied by mistake, probably because months ago I'd helped them with audit numbers before Dennis insisted I step back for optics. Curiosity prickled. I clicked. The PDF opened on my screen line after line of figures and transactions. Most of it looked routine, but my eyes stopped at one line item, highlighted in faint gray, $42,500 wired to Mohegan Sun Casino, labeled under Client Development. My stomach turned. I scrolled further. Another line, $18,000 to Atlantic City, same category, then another. This wasn't business, this was gambling. I printed the page and held it in my hands, staring at the neat numbers that told an ugly truth. Even with the proof in front of me, I felt a strange hesitation. For years, my family had drilled it into me. Family helps family. We don't keep score. We clean up quietly. But then why was I always the only one paying? I leaned back in my chair, the paper trembling between my fingers. For a moment, I could hear my mother's voice in my head, as if she were standing behind me. "Don't make trouble, Marjorie. Don't be dramatic. We just need a little help." I slammed the paper down on my desk. Help wasn't what this was. This was a con. By noon, the rain had slowed. I went for a walk through the quiet streets of Hartford, needing air. My umbrella clicked open, the sound sharp against the silence. Every step felt heavy, but focused. My mind replayed every lie, every manipulation. When I got back, my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail from Mom, her voice, sugar sweet. "You've always been so organized. Clara and Dennis really need your precision right now. I told them you could find a penny in a tornado. Maybe you could bring that folder soon." I replayed the message 3 times, each repetition stripping away the sweetness until all I heard was the core. Use your precision. Use your gift. Use yourself. I whispered out loud, not a daughter, not a sister, just a tool. The words stung, but they also sharpened me. That afternoon, I dug deeper. I opened the encrypted vault where I stored every important file. For years, I had been collecting copies, notarized documents, backups of signatures my parents swore I had signed but hadn't. I pulled them up one by one, letting the evidence wash over me. And then, in one folder marked 2015 business records, I found it an authorization form from an old joint account. My name was scrawled across the bottom. But it wasn't my signature. Not even close. The slant was wrong. The spacing off. Anyone with eyes could see it. I remembered that year vividly. Clara had asked me to co-sign for Dennis's first startup. I refused. Weeks later, Dad told me not to worry, that they had sorted it out. I never questioned how. Now I knew. They hadn't sorted it out. They had forged my name. I printed the form and set it beside the casino transactions. Side by side, the pattern was undeniable. Gambling, lying, forgery, all neatly tied together under the banner of family. The weight of it all pressed against my chest. I pushed away from the desk and paced the apartment, the papers still lying there, like proof of my worst suspicions. Around 4 o'clock, the phone rang again. This time it wasn't Mom, it was Clara. "Hey, sis," she said, her voice warm, rehearsed. "I just wanted to check on you. I know Mom's been persistent. You know how she gets." I said nothing. She kept talking. "Look, I didn't know Dennis was going to ask you for money like that. I swear I found out after the fact." Her voice wavered just a touch, but I knew that tone. She was covering, smoothing, managing, and then she slipped. "If Paul had called me first, I would have told him to back off." I froze. "Who?" There was a pause. Too long. I just assumed that was the guy who called you. You know, about the trust. But no one had called me by name. Not yet. And certainly not with the name Paul. She had revealed more than she meant to. My chest tightened. "I'll talk to you later," I said flatly, and hung up. As night fell, I pulled the blinds closed and spread the papers out on the dining table. Casino wires, forged signatures, voicemails dripping with manipulation, Clara's accidental confession. Piece by piece, the puzzle fit together. They weren't just asking for help. They were orchestrating something much bigger, and they expected me to play along quietly, blindly, like always. But for the first time, I didn't feel like the dependable one. I felt like a woman armed with proof. I sat back in my chair, staring at the evidence laid out before me. My reflection in the darkened window looked calmer than I felt, but inside, something shifted. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, about truth. And I knew, sooner or later, I would have to confront them with it. Sunday morning broke with an eerie stillness. The rain had cleared, leaving the streets slick and shining under a pale sun. I woke early, not because I wanted to, but because my phone buzzed with a new message. "Marjorie," Mom's voice chimed, "why don't you come over for coffee and pie today?" Just the 3 of us. No pressure. Just the three of us. That was how she framed it, as if the last 48 hours hadn't happened, as if they hadn't asked me for $60,000, as if I didn't already have proof of lies stacked on my kitchen table. Still, a part of me needed to see them, to look them in the eyes and confirm what I already knew. By 11:30, I was pulling into the driveway of the house I grew up in. The maple tree outside rustled gently in the breeze. For a moment, I remembered being 10 years old, climbing its branches while Dad shouted from the porch for me to come down before I broke my neck. But that was a long time ago. Inside, the house looked almost unchanged. New curtains, new rugs maybe, but the bones were the same. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon Mom had baked pecan pie, my favorite. She greeted me with a smile too wide, too cheerful, as though she could cover the cracks with sugar. "Come, sit," she said, ushering me into the living room where Dad was waiting. He stood stiffly, his expression carved from stone. On the coffee table sat a thick navy blue binder, closed neatly, like it had been waiting just for me. "We wanted to talk," Mom began, her voice gentle. "Not about Dennis specifically, but about the bigger picture, about family." I sat down on the edge of an armchair, my bag still on my shoulder. I didn't touch the coffee, didn't touch the pie. She slid the binder toward me, almost reverently. "We've been working on a plan. We didn't want to come to you without one." Across the cover, stamped in gold foil, were the words, "Emergency Family Plan." My breath caught. Slowly, I opened it. Inside were neatly tabbed sections, charts, proposed loan amounts, financial forecasts, written in a tone that pretended to be professional but stank of desperation. And then my eyes landed on page 6, Collateral Property, Willow Street Residence. Signatory, Marjorie A. Hayes. Notarized, February. I froze. My signature was there in black ink, except it wasn't mine. I turned the page carefully, keeping my voice even. "Where did you get these forms?" Dad cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Since you'd been helping Dennis with some taxes, it made sense to get ahead of things, to put the property in a structure that made legal sense." I tilted my head, my eyes still on the page. "So you forged my name?" "No," Mom said quickly, her face tightening. "It's not like that. Your father remembered seeing one of your old signatures, and Dennis's assistant helped us recreate the paperwork. It's just a formality." I looked up slowly. My voice was calm, but each word felt like steel. "That's a felony." Silence. The kind of silence that fills a room like smoke. They didn't deny it. Not really. They just sat there, hands folded, as if waiting for me to forgive them, to fold like always. I closed the binder with deliberate calm. You thought if it looked like I'd already agreed, I wouldn't fight it, that this would just be a cleanup. Mom's voice dropped, softer now, almost pleading. "We didn't mean harm. We just wanted to protect what we've built. This home, your father's reputation, Clara's future." I let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Protect it? By forging my name? By tying me to Dennis's gambling debts?" Dad's jaw tightened. "You don't understand the pressure we've been under." My hands curled into fists, but I forced my voice steady. "Number, I understand perfectly. You used me. Again." The air grew heavier. My heart pounded, but my face stayed calm. I stood slowly, smoothing my jacket. "Do you want me to keep pretending this is about pie, or do you want to talk about fraud?" Dad flinched. Mom's hands shook slightly as she gathered the untouched plates. I excused myself to the bathroom, gripping the edge of the sink as soon as I closed the door. The mirror showed a face calm enough to fake composure, but my fingers trembled. "They didn't even ask," I whispered to my reflection. "They planned this months ago. Not once did they call me for help before crossing the line. They just assumed." I splashed water on my face, steadied my breathing, and walked back into the living room. My purse was still on the chair. I reached inside and pulled out a small silver flash drive. I handed it to my mother, her brows knit. "What's this?" "A backup of your plan," I said softly, "in case the binder gets misplaced." She nodded slowly, uncertain, clutching it like it was both a gift and a threat. I gave her one last unreadable smile, then walked to the door. No yelling, no dramatics. Just quiet evidence passed from one hand to another. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit my face like a slap. I walked down the path to my car, each step echoing with a truth I could no longer ignore. They weren't asking. They were taking. And they believed they could keep taking forever. But not this time. Not anymore. The courthouse in Hartford smelled faintly of dust and coffee. Its marble floors echoed every footstep, and the ceilings were so high it felt like they could swallow you whole. I had been there before for work, helping firms manage audits or testimony, but never like this, never with my own blood on the other side of the aisle. Beside me sat Daniel Reeves, my attorney. Calm, precise, and relentless, he had guided me through every step these past 2 weeks. When I first handed him the binder and the forged forms, he didn't flinch. He simply nodded, as if he'd seen this story before, just with different names. "Stay steady," he whispered now as the judge entered. "Truth looks better than anger." Across the room sat my parents, stiff in their best clothes. Mom's pearls gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Dad's tie was knotted too tightly, his jaw set hard. Clara sat behind them, avoiding my eyes, twisting a handkerchief in her lap. Dennis wasn't there, conveniently out of state on business, according to their lawyer. The bailiff called the session to order. My heart thudded, but my face stayed calm. This was it. Years of manipulation had led to this room. Daniel began. He laid out the evidence with surgical precision. The forged authorization with my name. The casino wire transfers labeled as client development. The voicemail transcripts where my mother urged me to bring that folder. The binder itself with my fake signature notarized. He spoke clearly without embellishment. The truth was damning enough. The defense lawyer tried to paint it as a family misunderstanding. He said words like informal arrangement and miscommunication. He even suggested that perhaps I had forgotten giving my consent. I almost laughed out loud at that. Forgotten. My entire adult life had been spent remembering every betrayal. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with my hands steady at my sides. I took the oath, sat down, and looked straight at the jury. "My name is Marjorie Hayes," I began. "I'm an accountant. I work with numbers every day. I've built my life on details, and I can tell you with certainty I never signed those documents." I told them about my college fund at 17, about how it disappeared under promises that were never kept, about the years of being asked, pressured, shamed into giving more. And when I said no, I added, my voice clear, I was punished with silence, with distance, with being called selfish. I stopped being a daughter a long time ago. I became an ATM. The words hung in the courtroom, heavy and undeniable. I held up the forged document. This is not my signature. This is theft. This is fraud. And this is the final line I will not let them cross. When I finished, the room was silent. Even the defense lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Then came the hardest part. My father took the stand. He looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow under the courtroom lights. For a moment, a piece of me almost softened, but then he opened his mouth. "I only did what I thought was necessary," he said, voice gravelly. Dennis was in a tight spot. The family needed stability. Marjorie has always been reliable. I assumed she would understand. He didn't deny forging my name. He didn't deny taking my future and fitting it into their plan. He simply justified it like always. When Daniel asked him if he considered asking me first, Dad hesitated. We couldn't risk her saying no. The words landed like a stone dropped in water, rippling through the room. The jury leaned forward. The judge scribbled notes. I sat perfectly still, but inside I felt something crack open. For years, I had wondered if maybe I was too harsh, too sensitive, too unwilling to bend. And now, here was the truth in his own voice. They never saw me as a choice, only as a guarantee. After hours of testimony, the judge finally adjourned for the day. We filed out into the bright afternoon sun. I stepped onto the courthouse steps, the air sharp and clean in my lungs. Clara was waiting near the curb. She hurried toward me, her eyes red. "Marjorie," she whispered, "please. This is tearing us apart." I stopped. For once, I didn't feel the usual guilt rising. "Clara, it was torn apart long before today. You just didn't notice." Her face crumpled, but I turned and walked away. Daniel's footsteps steady beside mine. That night, back in my apartment, I spread the papers out again. The binder, the signatures, the transcripts. They no longer look like scattered pieces of a painful puzzle. They look like protection. For the first time in decades, I felt something close to peace. Not because the fight was over, it wasn't. Court would drag on, lawyers would posture, family members would whisper. But because I had finally stood up in the light, in front of strangers and judges and the very people who raised me, and said, "Enough." I poured a glass of water, sat by the window, and let the city hum outside my walls. Somewhere in the quiet, I heard my own voice again, steady and sure. "They will never take from me without my permission again." And for the first time, I believed it. The trial had adjourned for the week, but the weight of it clung to me like damp clothes. For 2 days, I tried to sink back into routine work emails, laundry, the simple act of watering my plants, but everything carried a strange silence, as though the world itself was waiting for my next move. On Tuesday evening, just as the sun dipped behind the Hartford skyline, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Clara's name. For a moment, I considered letting it ring out, but something in me wanted to hear her voice, if only to know where she stood. I answered. "Marjorie?" Her voice cracked, heavy with exhaustion. "Please don't hang up. I need to explain." I stayed quiet, waiting. She rushed on. "I didn't know about the forged documents until you showed them in court. I swear. Dennis told me you had already agreed, that you were helping. I wanted to believe him, Marjorie. He's my husband. What was I supposed to do? Call him a liar?" My throat tightened, but I forced calm into my words. "You were supposed to call me." Silence. The kind that admits guilt without words. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry. I should have asked. I should have seen it sooner. But Mom, she kept telling me you'd come around, that you always did." Her voice broke, the sobs tumbling out raw and unguarded. For years, I had been the one who carried the weight of family guilt, but now it poured through the line into my ear. I closed my eyes, picturing her curled on the sofa, twisting her handkerchief the way she always did when she couldn't face the truth. "I believe you didn't forge my name," I said softly. "But Clara, you knew something was wrong. You chose silence because it was easier." She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just wept quietly, and for the first time, I didn't rush to soothe her. I let the truth sit between us, sharp and undeniable. After a few minutes, she whispered, "Do you hate me?" I took a deep breath. "Number? But I can't trust you." I ended the call before she could reply. That night, I sat by the window, watching headlights trace across the dark streets. The phone call played over and over in my mind. Clara had always been the middle ground, the one who smoothed edges, who made excuses in the name of peace. But peace built on lies wasn't peace at all. It was just silence wearing a mask. Near midnight, the phone rang again. This time it was Dad. I hesitated but answered. His voice was low, almost gravelly. "Marjorie." I said nothing. "I never wanted it to come to this," he muttered. "Lawyers, courtrooms, strangers poking into our lives. It's disgraceful." "Then you shouldn't have forged my name," I replied flatly. He exhaled sharply. You think this is about money? It's about family, about holding things together when they're falling apart. Dennis is my son-in-law. Clara is my daughter. Your mother, she's drowning in worry. And you're the only one strong enough to fix it. My grip on the phone tightened. Strong enough or convenient enough? His voice grew harsher. You've always been stubborn, Marjorie, always putting pride before loyalty. We gave you everything, shelter, food, and upbringing, and this is how you repay us? Dragging us through the mud. The old guilt flickered, but this time it didn't root itself. I spoke slowly, deliberately. You gave me life. But you also took my college fund. You took my trust. You took my name and bent it until it suited you. I'm not dragging you anywhere. I'm showing the truth you buried. For a long moment, he was silent. Then he said, softer now, almost weary, if you do this, you'll never be welcome in this family again. I felt a strange calm settle over me, like a tide finally receding. Then I guess I'll stop knocking on a door that was never open. I hung up before he could answer. Sleep didn't come easily. I tossed under the weight of decades, the echoes of every time I had folded to keep peace. But as dawn lightened the sky, I realized something had shifted. For the first time, I had spoken without fear of their silence. I had cut the rope they used to tether me. That morning, I took a long walk through Bushnell Park, the summer air damp with dew. Families picnicked on the grass, children chased pigeons near the fountain, and life went on, indifferent to the battles in courthouse halls. I sat on a bench beneath the shade of an elm tree. The branches stretched wide and open, their leaves trembling gently. For years, I had longed for something like this. Quiet, unbothered, free from manipulation. The phone stayed silent in my pocket. No calls, no voicemails, just stillness. I let myself breathe it in, knowing peace wasn't something they could give or take. It was something I had to claim, and for the first time, I felt like I had. That evening, Daniel called to update me on next week's hearing. His tone was steady, but I could hear the respect tucked into his words. You did well on the stand, he said. They underestimated you. They always do. I smiled faintly, the smallest crack of warmth breaking through the exhaustion. Not anymore. When I hung up, I whispered to myself, like a vow, they don't get to define me. Not as a daughter, not as an ATM, not anymore. The final hearing came and went like the closing of a storm. The judge's words were measured, impartial, but the meaning was clear. The forged signatures invalidated every document. The emergency family plan had no standing. Any attempt to claim my property or assets was void. Relief didn't come as a surge, but as a slow, steady current. For the first time in years, the weight pressing on my chest began to ease. I walked out of the courthouse into the summer light. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and car exhaust, ordinary and real. Beside me, Daniel gave a small nod. It's done. I nodded back, but inside I knew it wasn't entirely done. Court could resolve legality, but it couldn't mend betrayal. That part was left to me. A week later, I returned to the Hayes house not with documents or lawyers, but with a single box in my hands. Inside were the last things I had left there. A few photo albums, a set of silver earrings my grandmother once gave me, and an old quilt I had sewn with Mom before high school. The house was quiet when I arrived. Mom opened the door, her face pale, her eyes swollen. She didn't smile this time. She didn't reach for me. She simply stepped aside. I walked to the living room and set the box on the coffee table, the same table where the binder had once sat like a trap. My father was in his armchair staring at the floor. He didn't look up. I came to collect what's mine, I said softly. No one answered. I lifted the quilt, ran my hand across the uneven stitches. Each knot had been tied by a younger me, a girl who still believed that love was enough to keep a family whole. I folded it neatly and placed it back in the box. Mom finally spoke, her voice brittle. "You don't have to do this, Marjorie." "Yes," I said, meeting her eyes. "I do." She flinched. Dad shifted but never lifted his gaze. I straightened, my voice steady but not cruel. "You've made your choices. I've made mine. I'm not your solution. I'm not your safety net. I'm not the daughter you can sign away on a line." For a long moment, silence filled the room. It wasn't the silence of guilt this time. It was the silence of finality. I picked up the box and walked to the door. At the threshold, I paused and said the words I had carried like a stone in my chest. "I forgive you." But forgiveness doesn't mean return. It just means I'm done carrying what isn't mine. Then I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. The days that followed felt strange, lighter, emptier, freer. I found myself cooking dinner without waiting for the phone to buzz. I walked through Bushnell Park without the shadow of their expectations trailing behind me. I even laughed with a coworker over lunch, realizing how long it had been since laughter came without weight. One evening, Clara sent a message. Not a voicemail, not a plea. Just a short text. "I don't expect you to reply. I just want you to know I'm trying to see it now. I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long time. My thumb hovered over the screen, but I didn't type anything back. Some doors needed to stay closed. Some truths were enough on their own. I turned off the phone and stepped out onto my balcony. The city glowed beneath me, windows lit like constellations. The air was cool against my skin, and for the first time in my adult life, the night didn't feel heavy. I whispered into the dark, almost to myself, "Sometimes the only thing you need to inherit is peace." The words lingered in the air, simple and true. Weeks later, I boxed up the last of the court papers and tucked them into my filing cabinet. They were evidence, yes, but more than that, they were reminders of what I had endured and of what I had walked away from. When friends asked about my family, I didn't spin stories anymore. I told the truth, simply and plainly. They made their choices. I made mine, and I've chosen peace. It didn't sound dramatic. It didn't need to. It was just life, finally lived on my terms. On a quiet Saturday morning, I spread the quilt across my bed. The uneven stitches looked almost childlike, imperfect. But when I lay down, the fabric felt warm, steady, whole. I closed my eyes and let the past drift, not erased, not rewritten, but placed firmly where it belonged behind me. The future stretched ahead, unclaimed, unmanipulated, mine. And for the first time in decades, I felt at home. We've walked through Marjorie's story, how love turned into pressure, and how she found the courage to choose peace. Remember, family doesn't mean ownership. True strength is knowing when to say no. You don't need wealth to leave a legacy. You don't need permission to protect your heart. And peace, real peace, never asks for proof. It simply stays. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And always remember, you matter, and your peace leaves a mark.